There's a difference between someone who's just doing something just to do it and get it over with, or just because they think they're doing it right, and someone who actually moves with intention and execution.
Hello, and welcome to the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. I'm your host, Nick McGowan. Today on the show, we have Ariffa Bevin. Ariffa, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Nick. How's it going on your side?
It's going well, and I'm sorry that I have to bring this back up, but I know you say you're doing well, but you are a Yankees fan. And we are recording this on Halloween, the day after the Yankees had a night of horrors. So I'm sorry for your loss. But the Phillies fan in me is not too sorry. With that being said, we joked about this before we hit record, but it's got to be really tough, especially like anything where you think about your team or your local community or even your country. We're a week away from two not very good options being put in front of people to vote to be leader of this country. And I think the World Series is a thing that we can look at and go, well, that really sucked for the Yankees, but it was really great for the Dodgers. Right. And fans on either side are upset or really ecstatic. And there are really tough things that we as people go through, especially people of marginalized communities, people that are just not able to be themselves. And then we start to look at that stuff, not only how it affects everything else in the country, but how it affects us, our mental wellness, our mental well-being, and everything that just holds us back from being who we are. So I really want to get into the nitty gritty of that sort of stuff. But why don't you kick us off? Tell us what you do for a living and what's one thing most people don't know about you that's maybe a little odd or bizarre.
What I do for a living is I am a executive coach. I work with individuals and businesses, particularly as it relates to mindfulness and self-empowerment, resilience. So I do a lot of workshops and trainings for organizations looking to improve the work-life balance of their employees, or simply just to have the conversation about it. Emotional intelligence, which is an interesting topic, but we have a lot of leaders who need it, right? And so it's a conversation that has to be had. So I do a lot of those as well. But what I get the most joy out of is these one-on-one conversations that I have with people who are looking for more of that self-mastery and self-empowerment. And a lot of them do tend to be leaders themselves. And a lot of them tend to be folks who really just want to learn a lot more about the self-mastery piece, right? How to either start this journey or continue on this journey and learn more. And I always say that the journey doesn't end. There is no ceiling, no end game, no end goal. But it's a conversation I love to have with folks one-on-one. So I do a lot of that. And I would say it's an odd thing about me because I don't think many people expect it from me. And you can tell me, Nick, if it's a surprise to you, considering this is our first time having a conversation like this. But one thing that stands out that has come across as odd because it wasn't expected by people is I love fighting as it relates to martial arts. And I was a former kickboxing instructor. I take martial arts right now, particularly samurai swordsmanship or kenjutsu. I love hand-to-hand combat. The instructor for one of my schools is a former Marine, and so we do a lot of military hand-to-hand combat, a lot of what he's learned, knife fighting, and I enjoy that tremendously. It is one of the greatest joys in my life and has helped me in so many different ways, especially with the mindfulness piece. But yeah, if my camera was faced a different way, you would see swords on my wall that I use for my training. I eventually want to get back into teaching kickboxing myself, and then eventually be a kenjutsu instructor and want to pass that knowledge on, particularly to our youth and the self-defense that I'm learning to others as well. But I love it. I enjoy it. I used to watch a lot of UFC as well. Could I do that? No, I cannot be a UFC fighter, but if I were trained to do it, maybe I'll have a good time. But something about it, and I think I know what the something is, but it's just, I enjoy it. I love it. And it's, again, a big part of my life that I intend to keep going with for a long time.
Obviously I want to know like why, what was the thing about, but one of the things that I love about the platform of podcasting specifically, but just the overall idea of just having conversations with just anybody and people, especially people that aren't part of your immediate circles, is you never know what's behind somebody's eyes, either what they're thinking, what they're doing, or what they like to do. So it's always awesome to me when I hear people say stuff that's like, well, this may seem odd. And I mean, it shouldn't, because I don't really know anything until I know the things. But we can pass judgment, and sometimes we start to go, well, that seems a little strange or
Right.
whatever. And for the most part, why the fuck does that seem strange at all? Like, who
Exactly.
are we to say anything about this?
Exactly.
God knows
Exactly.
what happened at some point where you were like, cool, that could be it. It's it's interesting when I think about UFC and I think about um, anything that has to do with martial arts, because for the most part, it feels like a lot of people will think, well, you have aggression, or you just want to be able to get that energy out, or this was something that was passed down to you for so long, or you were a huge Bruce Lee fan, or whatever bullshit like that. But from what I understand, having conversations with people that are really deep into that, it is so entwined with discipline. There's so much discipline with it. It's not like you're just a fucking Ninja Turtle wielding around a samurai sword. Um, it's got to be more than that. But what is it? Is it the discipline? Did something happen when you were in third grade and you got jumped by somebody and you said, fuck this, never again? Was it all of it?
Yeah, yeah, totally valid, by the way. I mean, it's a lot of things, firstly, to begin. The first is, number one, absolutely, it is the discipline. I'll start there first. The discipline specifically as relates to training yourself, and seeing yourself elevate and fail, and having the discipline to keep going and succeed, but then fail again and then keep going further, right? The discipline also to, and the compassion, I'm going to say as well, to be able to train with others who are both better but not as good as you. To mean that, like, I'm not going to punch as hard with this person or throw them as hard with this person because they're either a beginner or what have you, or have an injury. The discipline to not be an asshole and just to show brute strength and just throw this person just because I can, right? I never would do that, but you have people in the arts who do, and for me, that's not what I'm there for, right? I want folks who encounter and come across me, whether in training or in my work and what I do, to feel welcomed, right? And to not be intimidated, right? And but underneath that surface, if it came to me having to defend myself or someone else, I sure hope I would be able to do that. And so there's that discipline that's there. And again, the discipline also with the fact that there will always be someone better than me. Even when it comes to mindfulness with martial arts as well, there is always something to learn. There was always someone who does it a different way that I can learn from, right? And so I love learning from other arts and other schools and other systems. It's amazing. It's beautiful. And so that's number one. It's the discipline. I would say, going back to my youth, I always had this love for things that were quote unquote like not girly, right? Like I wanted to not be in this box of just because I'm a girl doesn't mean that I like pink things. Like I loved Xena, Warrior Princess. I don't know if you remember from the
Oh, yeah.
90s. Like she kicked ass, right? Like I was like, look, like she's gorgeous, but she's fucking beating the shit out of people. And I love that. And I want to do that. And so, being able to break the mold was something that I was always interested in, and not being the expectation or the stereotype that people expected me to be, whether it be from what I look like or who I represent or my background. That always fascinated me, right? And so, and I saw that in so many different forms throughout my life, and Xena being a great example of that. And so, there's that piece to it. And then there's the empowerment piece. One of the reasons why I love this whole journey of mindfulness is because it is indeed that self-empowerment that comes with it. And I see that with martial arts, and I have that with martial arts as well. Being able to, again, going back to defending myself or other people, being able to fight for something if it ever came to it, right? I'm learning samurai martial arts, and someone may easily say there are no samurai, but you don't really understand exactly what I'm learning, how it applies to the way I walk and move, and how I just move my body, and then apply that then to self defense and other aspects of my life. It all relates and it all matters, and so all of that is just why these arts just call to me so strongly.
Hmm. I'm really glad that you brought up arts, because that is an art. I at times will think about how our school systems keep removing arts,
Yeah.
like the actual arts, music, even art classes. And growing up, I was an art kid. I was kind of one of those kids where I was like, I don't want to fucking be in your class anymore. I got a project. And they'd be like, whatever. And I would go down to the art room and live there.
Yes.
Um, but that is a thing. Like, it is an art form. There's so many different pieces to life that is an art form, even mental wellness and our own mental journeys. This is an art form that we get to shape, but it is a solo mission surrounded by other people who are on these solo missions. But it's not just solo. Like, even with what you're doing with other people, like not tossing somebody just to be an asshole or to show your strength, that's being mindful about it.
Yes.
But even as you brought that up, I was like, I wondered if maybe at some point you've judged somebody like, oh, I don't want to toss this person or whatever. And then next thing you know, they fucking flip you on your ass. And you're like, what the fuck happened here? Then tables turn in a way, but 'tis life almost, like we get hit with things, and it's how we not only manage through it, but in something we talked about before we hit record on this, it's not about perfection. And it is totally about us being able to continue to move along and work through our things. Something I think is really important, and something I'm sure you do with any of the martial arts, is being able to go through and figure out, how do you become a little less bad than you were?
Mm.
Not about getting better as much as how do you do things just a little differently. Is that about right?
Yeah, definitely about right. Exactly that, in terms of how do we improve, right? How do we what are, like, we don't just want to do a particular kata, or a movement, it's called, or a particular form, just to simply do it, right? We want to do it with the intention of, what is the purpose of why I am swinging the sword this way, or why I am turning someone's arm up instead of this way, like further understanding the reasoning behind it, and then through that understanding, seeing how our body then responds, because there's a difference between someone who's just doing something just to do it and get it over with, or just because they think they're doing it right, and someone who actually moves with intention, right, and execution. And that ties also to the mindfulness piece in terms of that intention. We all know how critical that intention is to our mindset and how we shift and see things in our lives. And that absolutely plays a role in martial arts as well, because you can see it in the body and how we respond and how we move. It's all related.
Yeah. I wonder, when it comes to, everybody's different. Even if there's a group of people that are really similar, there are differences between them. And we all experience things differently. We all either interpret things, or we experience it on our nervous system differently than somebody else may. But there is struggle through it. And I think that's a part of it. I'd read Man's Search for Meaning, I don't know, a few years ago. And there's meaning and suffering was the main thing that I got out of that. And that there's a struggle that we go through, but that struggle is often the thing that actually helps us get through it. Like, think about the people that don't want to do martial arts. I'm sure you've mentioned to people you do this, and they're like, oh my God, I couldn't, or I
Yeah.
never would, or I never could, or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
there's more stuff to get down to, but I'm sure some of that is also comfort. Like, you wouldn't want to do it. And there's that comfort to it, but we have to be, and it sounds old and beaten, like you have to be uncomfortable to go through these things. But I think the more work that you do, the more fucking uncomfortable that you get, but the more comfortable you get in being uncomfortable, so that you start to work through it. But being so fucking aware of this, especially as you work through things and go, okay, how do I get through this? And how do I actually do it in a way that isn't pulling away your energy, but helping you? So, how does that tie into the work that you do right now with people?
Yeah, I want to respond to that real quick because you're bringing up so many great points here, Nick. So thank you. But one of the important things that you just brought up is the fact that when I was a kickboxing instructor, I quickly learned it, and my instructors now say this all the time, but I learned being an instructor myself that teaching others is also teaching yourself. Like you are also learning. And to exactly what you were saying about, people receiving things differently. Like as you were talking, I was going back to a student that I had. It was her first day, and as instructors, we had like a set like day one curriculum to go with folks, just going over the basics, and to just put it at a high level. This particular young lady really just didn't it was like she didn't know how to use her body, right? Like what the standard curriculum was in terms of like jab, cross, roundhouse. Like it just was not being received in the way that it typically was with our other students. And so I got rid of that curriculum for her, and we just broke it all the way down in a different way, and she shined, right? And so like and for me it was learning for me, especially because in the beginning I was like, okay, holy shit, what am I like not saying right? Or what is it? And then I was like, no, this is actually a challenge for me to in order to support this person with further understanding how to do this in a way that works for her and where she can process and understand what I'm asking her to do. And I loved it. I loved that challenge, but most importantly, it was a learning for me on how do I shift this framework for someone that I have who's not receiving it in the typical way, right? And so I just appreciate that you call that out because it's so critical to this path of life, and it definitely relates to what I do on a regular basis because every person is different, like you said. I may have a curriculum talking about self-empowerment, but at the end of the day, that is going to look totally different for the person I may see the following week, right? And that is going to look totally different when I do a group session or when I have a workshop with leaders talking about emotional intelligence, right? That's all going to have to shift and be different depending on who I am working with. And mind you, we can totally be the type of people where we're just like, nah, this is what it is. This is what you're paying for. This is what you're getting. If it don't work, that's on you, right? Like and that happens. That absolutely happens, and it could be that way. But for me and for what I do, and for me to actually feel like I am fulfilling my mission in life, it can't be that way. And I love the learning that I receive, right, from doing this work.
Yeah, it shouldn't. And should isn't a real thing. Like there is no should, there should not. But I think based on similar principles that it seems like we have, if you're going to do something, fucking do it. And don't just do it to charge people money. Like there are lots of coaches out there that everything they produce is $10,000. Any student comes in, it's $10,000, and you go through the same shit. Um, and that doesn't really make any sense at all. Everybody is different. Everybody comes in with their own things. Everybody has their own interpretations of things. Everybody has their own baggage, their own trauma, no matter what size. It's a little T, big T, fucking ginormous T, whatever. There's all these things that come into all of this, and everybody does need to be treated a bit differently. And I think that's a thing about people when they don't see that. Like I think about school, being in school as a little kid, there were people that some teachers that just couldn't handle some of the kids because the kids just didn't want to be there. And there was stuff, I'm sure it's happening at home or whatever, but there was also like, this kid just needs to be handled a little differently. And I remember seeing teachers, a few of them, handle those kids a little differently, and it changed everything. But that's from a personal perspective where that person goes, okay, I see that this isn't landing. You're not broken. Let's figure out how to actually have it land for you. And one of the things that you brought up just a few seconds ago, and even before we hit record, was about executives and the emotional stability, I guess, handling of emotions, and overall your EQ and everything that ties into that. There are a lot of business owners that I talk to and that I've talked to over the years, some that I've worked with, some that I've just had conversations with, that try to fix their business. And it's typically not your fucking business. It's you. It's you as the owner. It's you as the leader in your organization or whatever. Or where leaders will be a certain way and go, why the fuck isn't everybody else like this? Because you're a monster. Or
Yeah.
because of whatever. It's like those people, the more that we can look at, really reevaluate how we are as leaders, it all starts with us. And we've heard it so many times, like it all starts with leadership, but it's such a rah-rah bullshit session where people are like, yeah, that makes sense. Starts with leadership. I got to fucking change everything in this company and all these people need to go. Like, you're the asshole. Maybe you need to go.
Is. That's
But
exactly what it
how
is.
do we help those people? The two different camps here. How do we help the horse get to water and then drink? And how do you help the horse that's already there trying to drink and is like, this is just a fire hose that I'm learning from, and just I feel my teeth being rattled out. Like, how do you deal with both sides of that?
You know, you're bringing up something that it's so interesting to me, right? Because on one hand, it is so obvious, at least to me, that leaders really are the key here, right? But then I will have these conversations, and you've had these conversations with these leaders where it's the like they don't know why there's issues. They don't know why people are leaving. They don't understand why the culture is ass, and like why people don't want to stay. And like it is a conundrum. Like it's and mind you, they are awful people, but to everyone else, it's obvious what the issue is. But to them, truly, to them, they don't understand what the problem is. Like they do not see it. And so and I will continually be fascinated by that. I really will. So to your question about, how do we help these people? I think the first the first step, or one of the steps I should say, is understanding that, helping them to understand what being a leader actually means. Yes, you have this power and the visibility and the responsibility, but helping them to understand what that actually means, right? I'm not talking about you having the power to fire people or give raises, da, 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 da. That's not what we're talking about here. We need to talk about, what does it mean when you actually have responsibility, and what does that look like in terms of how that impacts your team, right? For example, when you're people who are burnt out, and I've seen so many times, oh my goodness, people who are burnt out and they have unlimited PTO, but the leader doesn't understand why people are not taking advantage of that, why they're not taking time off. Well, have you set an example for them in terms of what that life looks like, work life balance, or trying to maintain it? Have you set the expectation that people should be responding to emails on Sundays? Have you set the expectation that people should be on meetings outside their office hours? Like what type of example are you actually setting as the individual responsible for this team? And so it really has to start with them truly understanding what that role as a leader means and how that ties to the impact that it has on their team. And that, for a lot of folks that I've met with and executives that I've met with, has been mind blowing, because again, it's a lot of the conversation along, yeah, I'm responsible for writing, the strategy for, my organization, or all of these responsibilities that, yes, on paper they are. But at the end of the day, here is what actually matters when it comes to the culture of your team and the people who are working for you.
There's a lot of just unclean movements where people are doing things because they were taught that way by some leader in the 80s or 90s or early 2000s or wherever they are. And now they're force feeding their team because they were force fed, and this is
Yes.
how this should be, and this is what we
Yes.
do as leaders. And I think simultaneously we need to take into account that different energy types handle things differently. Different people do different things. Um, there's there are the leaders that'll send out emails at dumb o'clock in the morning, and there are others that'll send them out in the middle of the afternoon for specific purposes.
Mm.
And that's part of the uncleanliness of it. I know for me, like I typically don't go to sleep till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I won't wake up
Mm,
till 9, 10 o'clock. So I'll
mm,
sometimes send out an email at noon, or not noon, midnight, one,
mm,
2 o'clock in the morning. And
mm,
there are times where I'm like, I should schedule this so that it goes out at a
mm,
normal person time.
mm.
Most times I'll just send it out because that's what I'm doing. I don't have that expectation of anybody that works with me, but I can also talk about those sort of things. Like, this is what my life looks like. This is what I
Exactly.
do. When I send things out, don't feel like you have to respond to me at dumb 30 in the morning. Like, that's just when I fucking thought about it and I send it out to you. So we all need to do our own things, but
Yes.
we need to trust ourselves. And this is something that, candidly, that I've been struggling with at times and working a lot more on, is how do we trust based on the bullshit that we've been force fed that has become just part of the norm, which is also tied into our subconscious winning strategy of like, this is how I win in the world. And then being able to break yourself out of that. So those
Yeah.
executives that have a hard time going, well, I don't get it, fucking makes sense,
Yeah.
because you've been force fed this. You've been told this is what success looks like. This is how you do it based on the mentors you worked with or the bosses you had or whatever bullshit you've watched or listened to. But what does it actually mean for you is such a tough question that even when we ask that, and I hope people will listen to this and just think that question and go, yeah, what does that mean for me? But I hope that they go deeper with that and keep asking, because the first initial answer probably is bullshit. The second, third, fourth, 18th answer is a little less bullshit, but probably still smells the same, because it's so much shit and layers that we have to get through. So, along that lines, what do you do with people to be able to get them to the point of processing through past traumas, understanding that there was a system at play with, this is how you do these things and this is what success looks like, to be able to break free from that, to just straight up be themselves in all the fucking weird, goofy, terrible glory that it is, to then be able to mold themselves into what feels right for them to actually be the leader. Like, it makes me think of slowing down to speed up, but not in a bullshit corporate way of like, well, we have to slow everything down and speed everything up and inefficiencies and blah, 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 blah. Like, how do you actually go fucking timeout? Let me take a step back, reorganize, and then kind of move forward. And that is a slow fucking grinding process.
You're
So
answering it.
I'm not
You're
asking for you to give me the secret sauce here or to tell everybody this, but those
yeah.
people that are going through that shit right now that are like, right, right, like, what sort of advice do you give them as they're like, all right, well, I can see that and I feel that, but fuck, this is difficult.
Mm. So you're mentioning so many amazing things here. My sticky note is full of things to respond to.
New sticky note.
So for the people and the leaders, I'll make a response for that. For the leaders, right? You're calling out something so important that I think subconsciously a lot of leaders don't even know that they're doing, which is for many of the leaders, because they had struggled to get where they are, they feel like other people have to do the same. And I have heard that time and again. Well, I had to deal with X, Y, and Z, or you don't know how long it took me to get here. That is totally valid. I like your experience is totally valid. However, exactly. However, that should not be the experience of someone else. Like if you had an option to not go through that, are you telling me that you wouldn't take it? Like what
Come
what,
on.
what do you mean? So having that conversation is really, really important to make sure that they're aware, because when you really understand, and some of them really do, honestly, Nick, have like great stories. Again, totally valid. Their experiences are totally valid, but you do not need to put that on someone else. You don't need to put your trauma, like I again, you have, and leaders tend to be sensitive, so I do very much validate what they went through. I'm not invalidating it, but the people who are coming after you do not need to go through that as well. And so there needs to be a hard conversation about that, right? About that experience, because at the end of the day, if you're telling me that you don't want to make these changes because you're literally telling me you want people to suffer, then there's a deeper problem going on there. Because if you're telling me that you want people to struggle, right, and have a difficult path, then there's a deeper problem that we need to really talk about here. And so I love having those type of hard conversations with leaders who tell me about, their journey and how they got to where they are, because a lot of the time it follows right up with, I felt like I had to struggle. So why shouldn't someone else struggle like I did? So I hear that a lot. I really do. And then, for the folks who are on the other side of it, right, really trying to manage it and deal with a lot of this, I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier, about solo mission, right? Because I resonate with that so strongly, especially when you mentioned that this is not only a solo mission, but, there are others around us who either help this journey or test this journey as well. But when I think of the workplace, especially when it comes to solo mission, it's the empowerment that we have to recognize that we have the power and empowerment. And yes, it's important for leaders to have these conversations and talk about it. But using the exact example of emails, right? Just something simple as emails. Yes, you may send them at 2 a.m. in the morning or 12 a.m. at night, but at the same time, individuals should really truly feel empowered to not respond. And unfortunately, a lot of people, for whatever reason, may be up at that time. A lot of people feel the guilt that comes with that when they do not. And much of the time, and I have been in work environments myself, if you set that expectation of responding like that, then that is going to be the expectation moving forward. And so I talk a lot about how do you not only set up what your boundaries are, but how do you also maintain them moving forward? Because like everything else, this is a journey. It's not going to be perfect, but how do you work on defining what those boundaries are and keeping them, because they will be tested? How do you keep them moving forward? Right. Because you, as a leader, may have someone who absolutely can be like, listen, like, it's not my fault. Like, my leader sends me an email at 2 a.m. Like, how do I know? Right. How do I know that it's not okay to not respond? Like, I feel so bad that, and I hear that a lot as well. But we have to talk a lot about that empowerment, especially with the solo mission piece. So I appreciate you mentioning that, because it's a great way to summarize what this journey is. And of course, the mastery piece is a part of it as well. But it does summarize it up really well.
To take it a little further, if somebody feels that guilt or that shame, it's not always, but it's probably perpetuated from that leader, their boss. But I think most everything ties back to our formative years.
Mm,
Between 4 and 7 or 8 years old, you learned at some point, your subconscious specifically was like, oh, this is what we do to stay safe. This is what we do to not be abandoned or kicked to the side or anything like that. So I question that. And I've had conversations with people at different points over the years of like, why the fuck? Why do they do this at 2 o'clock in the morning? Or like, why do you feel like we have to respond? And why do they expect us to respond from these things? And granted, that was kind of younger years of me of like, I don't fucking get why this is the thing. Why are you being a jerk? And that was about it. But I do think that there's something that happened when we were younger that subconsciously we were like, this is how we stay safe. This is what we do. And then 25, 30 years later, you're in a corporate environment or whatever role you're in, and something comes through and you go, oh my God, I need to get back to mom or dad, or I need to get back to this person, because that leadership, that authority that they have, instead of being able to understand, like, I'm going to do what I want to do and what feels right for me, which gets back to the unclean, just being able to move through life cleanly, but us getting deeper and deeper and deeper. Like, I see a lot of shit about people talking about quiet quitting or people taking naps at home, or even, and I'm going to jump back to sports for a second. There was the Anthony Richardson pulled himself out of the game, the Colts game last week, because he was tired. He pulled himself out for a play because he didn't feel like he could be at his best to be able to do it. And now he's actually benched. And that feels like a political move where Joe Flacco gets tossed back in. My cousins grew up with Joe Flacco, so I kind of think that's cool that he's still playing in the NFL. But I feel for Anthony Richardson, where the dude was honest and was like, I'm not going to lie, I was tired, so I pulled myself out. And now they're all going, well, we can't have this. We all need to we need to show that we are this sort of way, or we are men or whatever it is. And that is such fucking bullshit. And we tie it back into leaders or people in office spaces or in any sort of organization that we're in, volunteers even. You think you have to do all these things. And sometimes people are just beating upon people or just using and abusing because they went through that. They thought it should be that way. And I think that's fucking maddening. Look, I almost died a couple times. I overdosed on heroin, tried to kill myself a few times, have suicidal ideation, got divorced, had different businesses fail. I don't want anybody to go through any of that. How the fuck? How does that make any sense? I do see how if somebody goes through things and they can be better from those things, that's cool. I want people to be able to learn and grow. But how dare, even subconsciously, I go, you know what? Well, you haven't gone through the same shit I've gone through. So I want you to put a couple bags of heroin up your nose. And then I want you to try to live and then go through a divorce and close down a few businesses and try to jump off a condo building. Go ahead, do all that, because then after that, you'll be fine. Like, what the fuck kind of madness is that? I don't think anybody would really say that vocally because that's ludicrous. There may be a handful of fucking monstrous people that could say things like that. But for the most part, even those leaders that you talk to, they're probably like, no, that's not what I mean at all. It's like, but that is actively what you're doing and what you're saying. So along that lines, what's that piece of advice you'd give to somebody that's on their path towards self-mastery, trying to figure this stuff out?
You said it right there. I hope this doesn't come across as discouraging, but the first thing that comes to mind, Nick, is that it's a path, meaning that if this is the first time that you're ever delving into self-mastery and mindfulness, know that number one, it's what works for you, what resonates for you. It's not going to be anything that is going to be immediately perfect, or this path is not about perfection, or if you forget to meditate for 20 minutes tomorrow that you failed. It's not about that at all. It is what you said, Nick, that the solo mission, and what resonates and feels good for you, and just supports you on what is truly a path. And it's a path because we will always have stress. We will always have chaos and ridiculousness that happens in our lives. And some days and years and months is going to be better. But this path is about how do we respond to it, right? That solo mission. Like, I'm going to keep using that because it's beautiful, Nick. But just how do we ourselves respond to that? How do we react to it? How do we react to whatever is happening around the world, or how do we protect ourselves even from it? And so, my advice is to start with what works for you, what resonates for you, and keep working at it, because this is something that is long term, and things in life are going to change and shift, and again, we're always going to have the chaos and the good things in our life too, right? And so, how do we respond to that always? And so that's the main thing that I want to share with folks out there.
I deeply appreciate that. And along with the solo mission thing, it's kind of a mind fuck in some ways, but I do believe that purpose and our individual purpose isn't just for our solo endeavors. It's a community-based thing, but it does take us doing the things that we can do. And really, if you think about it, if you're going to be here, be here. And if you're going to do it, fucking do it. And enjoy the ride of it. Some people really love roller coasters, and they love when things go up and down and their belly jumps into their throat and like everything else. And we go through that on a daily basis at times, and we can get better through that stuff. But it is us actually going, well, what is this? Really, what the fuck is this? And why is this person doing this thing? And what do I do with it? And that's back to that, at least solo start in a sense. And I think we could sit here and we could talk for hours and hours and hours and not bash upon your Yankees. So one more little jab, why not, for the Phils? On that note, where can people find you and where can they connect with you?
They can find me at empoweredmindfulpathways.com. I have a contact page right on there that folks can reach out to me on. I'm on social media as well. So Instagram, Empowered Mindful Pathways as well. So folks can find me on there with my handle. Either way works.
Awesome. Hey, it was great talking with you today. I appreciate your time. Thanks for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.